Hi guys, Drea from Aloha Plant Life here, and today I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into plant styling. I have mentioned and touched on it briefly, mostly in my plant tour videos, but I really wanted to give you more of an understanding of how I go about doing my plant styling, making the choices that I make all the way from what plants I'm putting where, which plants I'm grouping together, why I chose the pots I chose, etc., etc. Because I'm sure lots of times you guys see in videos of plant tours and things, plant styling moments, and you're like, wow, I really want to know how to create that in my house. Or perhaps you've tried to create plant moments in your house and you're just frustrated because you feel like they never turn out the way that you see in other people's houses. So I'm going to give you some ideas, tips, and tricks on how to make it work. And some of these rules that I'm going to give you, you don't have to follow these rules, but these are kind of like design guidelines. That's the word I want. The guidelines that I'm going to give you can apply to any kind of interior design in your house, so not just plants. But there's two important things regarding plant styling in specific that I want to mention first for you to keep in mind. First one is every surface is a potential plant stand or plant shelf. I follow the rule of if it fits, it sits. And yes, I know that's what we usually say about cats trying to sit in boxes and things, but I actually follow that guideline. If the pot and the plant in the pot fits in a space, then it sits there if I want it to sit there. So don't let anybody tell you that you can't put, for example, small plants on a floor, because you can. I'll give you some examples of that too. Or that big plants like this monstera have to be on the floor. Oh no, you can put this in the middle of a table if you want, and it can work. And we will talk about when and why it works a little bit later. But don't let anybody tell you anything can't go places, because it can, but you need to kind of follow certain guidelines to make it look right. And that's what I'm going to help you with here today. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is almost anything can be turned into a planter. So pots are kind of expensive, you guys, and right now I need some more pots, and I don't really have the money or the inclination to go spend the amount of money I need to for the amount of pots I need. But you'd be surprised what you can come across in your house that can be used as a planter or just at a store. And I will always say, garage sales are an excellent place to go to look for pots. Keep that one in mind. But if you don't have time to go driving around all over the place to garage sales, go to like your local Hobby Lobby. I think that's where I got this little basket for about maybe like $5 or $6. And I'm gonna take some plastic lining I have, and I'm gonna run a bead of hot glue around the inside top edge of this basket. I'm gonna press that plastic down in here, and I'm gonna press it at the top around that glued edge and then trim the plastic down. And now I got like a perfect little planter. Other things you might not think of. If you have any of these, I'm sure this looks very similar to some people because a certain flower arrangement company sends a lot of their flowers out in these glass vases that are opaque. This is another good one too. You just grab a plant, pop it in there, there you go, planter. And I'm not saying to plant directly into these, you guys. I'm primarily talking about using all of these as cover pots. Keep your plant in your nursery pot and just use it as a cover pot. Works out perfectly. Another thing you might not think of, decorative coffee cups. At least I call them decorative. This one says not a day over fabulous. These are the kind of the cutesy coffee mugs that you'll get just kind of as like gifts, but they're not very well made. Like this isn't like a super sturdy coffee cup. I feel like if I used it to actually drink coffee out of on a regular basis, it might not last that long, but definitely can make a lifelong planter for you. And this is the kind of thing that I think is really cute. If you have plants at your office, like if you're not working from home, well, even if you are working from home, but in office spaces, I think it's really cute to use things like this on your desk for plants. Now this plant's a little bit too big for it, but you get the gist. That'd be really cute to like have on your desk with like a plant in it. You're just repurposing a coffee cup you already have. Another thing, candles. How many of us have candles that we burn them down and they're in something and now we're like, okay, do I just throw this away? It feels kind of wasteful to me, but I digress. If you do have that situation, because we all do, look, candle, when this gets totally burnt down, this is ceramic. It's just a little ceramic thing. That's basically a ceramic pot. Once you get that bottom layer of wax, once it's burned all the way down, get that out of there. This is perfect for a 2-inch plant right here. So those are two big things to keep in mind when I'm going through this. Now, I want to talk first, I guess this would be second now. I want to talk second about those guidelines, those design guidelines that they teach you if you go to school for interior design or anything like that. And the first one is the rule of threes. I say the rule of threes, but really I'm going to call it the rules of ones, threes, or fives. And you'll understand more when I start showing you the examples around the house. But basically, your eye really doesn't appreciate too much symmetry. When we have too much symmetry, it's not natural, something about it bothers us, and we aren't really drawn into it. So you want odd number groupings when you're grouping things for styling purposes, including your plants. And I said rule of ones because there are cases and plants where they are just really a star in and of themselves, and you try to group them with other plants and it's like either they're outshining all the other plants or they're getting lost in the other plants, and they don't deserve to get lost because they're a star, shining star. So then in that case, you would want them to be the singular element. The second big guideline that I'm going to give you for keeping in mind how you're arranging things is the rule of triangles. So triangles make us happy. At least they make our eye happy. I mean, I don't know. These are things you don't think about, you guys, but when I'm showing you some of these, I'm actually gonna overlay on screen for you where the triangles are so you understand what I'm saying. But basically, the rule of triangles helps us make sure that we're creating a pleasing height, varying heights to things, and a pleasing various depth to things. So going to be showing you a lot of examples of that, but that's the big thing you need to keep in mind. The rules of ones, threes, and fives, and triangles, and you'll get it as we're going along here. So another thing I want you to keep in mind is you're trying to create a moment. We call these vignettes, but for simplicity purposes, we can also call it a moment. You're wanting to create these interesting moments throughout your house that stop and make people look. And I'm going to recommend that you start by picking your pots. If you have a space where you're wanting to do something, take a look at the decor around your room and think first about what pots do I have that are going to fit in with the decor and the color scheme that's already going on in this room. Then when you start picking your plants, you can test them out in the pots, see if it's working, if it's not working, see if you need to switch plants out, or maybe you switch pots out. But just have a grouping on hand that works for that room. And I'm going to tell you too, there are several things that you can do with the pots. You can either tell a color story. So for example, I've got a little gray cement pot here. I've got a little darker gray one here. I could get another gray one that's slightly bigger than these that could be light or dark or just a completely different shade of gray, but they're all gray. I could do the same thing with just having this type of pot in 3 different sizes, the exact same pot if I wanted to. Maybe I want to tell a gray and white story, so I could add a white pot to this as well. That would work, a larger white pot. But these are all kind of similar pots. They're this concrete pot and similar texture to them. So that's really a color story. You could also do more of a texture story. I don't have a lot of, I'm not super big into texture stories and what I've done in my house so far, but basically what that would look like is if you had 3 pots that were all this color, this gray color, but they were different shapes. Like one was ridged, one was smooth, one was square. That would be more of a texture and shape story where all the pots were just one color. Now, once again, these are just guidelines. So if you wanted to have a hot pink pot, a neon green pot, and a bright yellow pot together, go for it. Go for it. If that is your vibe in your home, you go for it. Nobody's gonna stop you. So I'm gonna set these aside. I don't know if you guys can hear that bird in the background. I'm sitting next to my fireplace and there's birds that like to just sit up there and chirp. It's, you know, it's adding to the ambiance of creating that outdoor space indoors. So we're just gonna keep rolling with it here. So I do realize, guys, that I'm kind of, and I didn't really say this up front, but I'm kind of taking you through this the way that I do it. So I gave you those guidelines, and then I just told you to go kind of pick all your pots that could potentially go in a space, because once you start picking your plants, sometimes you're going to be like, I thought that pot was going to work, but it's not going to work with that plant. And you don't want to have to be going back and forth finding more pots. Just get all the pots that might potentially work in a room together before you start. Now, the next thing I do is pick the plants that I'm potentially going to want to put in there. And same thing here, get a variety of plants. Or don't, but you're going to end up probably going back and forth, because if I'm being honest with you guys, you know, I have, if you saw my living room plant tour, I have 6 shelves that I put up on the wall over the couch in there, and it took me hours because I had ideas, but then some of the plants were too tall for the shelf, some of the plants were too wide for the shelf. It's going to take some time, but I really enjoy doing it. So even though it took a lot of time, like, to me, it was an enjoyable task, and I'm looking at it right now. I'm like so happy with how it turned out. But also, when I was trying to do 6 shelves, I had to think about how the shelves looked together, right? So another good thing would be to start with a small space in your house before moving into bigger spaces and doing something massive like that, so that you can kind of get a feel for and get quicker and at making these kinds of decisions that I'm talking you through today to style a specific place, right? Okay, so picking the plants. Picking the plants, that's always kind of the funnest part, right? But how do you pick the plants? Which plants do you do? So the first thing you need to think about when you're going to pick your plants is the space that you're going to be putting them in, and making sure that you're picking plants that work in that space in terms of lighting requirements, right? Because we want our plants to survive and thrive. So we've got to make sure we're styling appropriately and not just putting plants there because they look cute if it's a full sun plant and it's a little light space, because now you're just setting yourself up for failure and the plant up for failure, and I do not promote that, so sorry. Not going to be my advice to be doing anything other than putting the appropriate plants in the appropriate lighting situation. But beyond that, you want to think about height. You want to be able to have varying height. However, that is not actually the first thing I think about, because after I talk about picking the plants, I'm going to talk about ways of cheating height issues. I still think it's a good idea to collect some of varying heights because it makes it easier from the get-go, but you're not totally going to be locked in if you have a bunch of plants that are all like 4-inch plants in the same height, because we can find ways around it, and I will show you how here in a bit. But I like to think about, am I wanting to, kind of like what I was talking about with the pots. It's very similar. So I think about, do I want to tell a color story with the plants? Do I want to tell a shape story with the plants? Do I want to tell a size story with the plants? Like I was just saying, have like a huge one, a medium one, and a small one. Do I want to tell a texture story with the plants? And so what do I mean by all that? Well, I've got some examples here for you to show you just exactly what I do. Let's start with color, because actually I grabbed these 3 plants and I was just like, why did I never group these together? And I'm thinking about it now, probably because one of them really wants a little bit more sun than the others, but they're really cute together. My Ficus elastica ruby is one of them. Let me grab her. So this is my Ficus elastica ruby. Called that because of that ruby color on those leaves, that pinkish tone. So this is what I would call a color story. And a color story, this is actually kind of a color and shape, and now that I'm getting down to a texture story, this is a good example of all 3 combined into one, which I've never done before, but when I was just looking at them today to pull for this video, I was like, wow, that would be kind of fun. So you've got her and she's got that pinkish color. So let's talk about the color part first. Pinkish color. So I said, what else has like pinkish tones that could complement this? But I'm gonna have to scoot back here, you guys. So I've got my Chinese evergreen. This is my Aglaonema that has the pinkish reddish colors on there as well. And so grabbed that one. So now we've got 2 pinkish stories going on here mixed with the green. And then I grabbed, once again, I need more hands today, you guys, my Shumi red peperomia, that is this reddish pinkish color, dark red pinkish color with these ringo leaves. And so now I've got these 3 plants that I'm going to try my best to hold up here for you that all have like reddish pinkish tones to them. And the nice thing is the Shumi red really is like a deep, deep version of the softer tones that are on these other ones, but these go well together from a color standpoint. Now, if we're looking at them, they also are, one is the tallest, one's the middle height, and one is the shortest. So that's what I'm talking about height story. The other thing is that they all have different leaf shapes. So that would be a shape story. They pretty much all have different leaf textures too, because this one's, the Shumi red is the wrinkled texture leaves. And then you've got the smooth texture up here on Ruby, but it's really thick and kind of waxy. And then this one's an even smoother but thinner texture to that leaf. And so there's a whole nother story there as well. So that's kind of an example that I hadn't even thought of before, where it's all of those things rolled into one. You may be like, that's overwhelming, Drea, back it up a step. Let me set this down, I'm gonna do just that. So there you kind of saw a combination of all of those things at play. And if I'm being honest with you, lots of times it is going to be a combination the more I think about it. But I'm going to give you some other examples so you can kind of just understand my thought process. So let's say I wanted to do an all green plant story, but I wanted there to be distinct variation in the leaf texture. So for example, I've got my satin pothos here, which is this lovely green color, and you can see the texture on the leaves there. It's got that silverish variegation and it creates kind of a raised texture to it. So I got this plant. Now I want another green plant with a different texture on it. So I'm gonna grab my other wrinkled leaf peperomia, my frost peperomia here. So this, just like that shumi red, has those wrinkled leaves. So that's a wrinkly texture. This is like a raised texture. But look, color-wise, these look really good together and we're creating that green vibe. Now, looking at this, my thought process would be I could add another plant with a different texture that's similar in color to these, but I think it needs a little bit more variation. So perhaps what I would add behind this, and since I can't hold all three of these very easily, imagine where my head is where I would put this next plant I'm going to show you when grouping it with these. And that next plant is my black velvet alocasia. So this plant has these very, very velvety raised texture leaves. I don't know how well the velvetiness reads on screen, but it feels like velvet. And if you were here in person, it looks like velvet. But this could have been, like I said, would have been where my head was while I was holding those other two plants. And now I've got a darker green to kind of offset that softer green, but it's still a green plant situation, and the distinctive difference between the three is the actual texture of the leaf. Now, because this is a longer stemmed plant and this guy stays pretty short and compact, and this is actually a trailing plant, now I've created my height story as well, because this one's going to stay low and trail, this one's going to get the tallest, and then this one will be the second tallest. So hopefully this is making sense. So now let's say I wanted to really just do crazy different shapes. So I'm going to stick to my greens plants again, just to keep this simple for you guys. And we're going to look at what's in my office here. These plants obviously were too big for me to have sitting here in front of me and me still be on camera, but you can see here I've got my split leaf philodendron in the back. It's a very large plant, so there's the height again, but look at the shape of those leaves. This is like a crazy little plant here. And then we've got my Aglaonema Maria is the variety in the front here, and she's got these long lance-shaped leaves, but also still green. Now there is a little bit of variation here because she has a little bit of variegation, but still it ties in well, but completely different shaped leaves. And then we've got my Syngonium white butterfly, once again, green plant, but completely different shaped leaves than the others too. But you can see how they go together because of the color, but now I've given them the variation and told an interesting story with the shapes. And once again, luckily these plants have their own variations in height, although you can see I have cheated it a little bit here, but we'll get into that here in a second. Now, the next thing I want to touch on when you're picking plants is thinking about where you're putting them, if perhaps you might want to break up a hard line. So if you're looking here at the shelves in my living room, you can see how I've used hanging plants to trail over the edges of them to help break up the hard lines, especially on the 2 end shelves. That is something that you can do as well. And so keep in mind that height isn't just, if we're talking about plants being on a shelf or a ledge or like your mantle, height isn't just up, height can also be down with your trailing plants. Another thing is you could actually hang a plant to tie it in to your other plants. So you're now seeing where I've been sitting and you can see what's going on here. And so basically I'm using that plant that is attached to the wall to trail down in and tie into the Monstera and the Tenanthe setosa that is on the TV stand. So that is my grouping of 3, but I've taken it a little bit differently. And look at the triangle, you guys. There's still a triangle here. It may be hard for you to see it. The triangle just got a bit bigger and a bit different shaped. So I'm still following that rule of triangles and groupings of 3s or 5s, and we will get to that grouping of 1 example here soon. So hanging plants are another great thing to do to tie in from various places. You can also hang them from the ceiling in certain places to tie plants together. So just keep that in mind. Hanging plants are a great way to tie certain things in and break up any hard edges if you're feeling like things are too, angular. That would be a good word, right? Okay, so let's say now you've chosen your plants. You've now tested your pots. When you're picking those pots, make sure that you follow the rule of it's one or the other. And what do I mean by that? I mean, you're either showcasing the pot or you're showcasing the plant. And sometimes pots can be like really cool looking. That's great. But if you want the plant to be the star, make sure it's not in a planter that is begging to be the star. If you have this crazy cool, unique sculptural planter that people are gonna be like, oh my God, that pot is awesome. Now they're looking at the pot and not the plant. So if you want the plant to be the star, don't let the pot outshine it, and vice versa. So hopefully now you've got all of your plants assigned to their pots, and now you're trying to arrange them into your triangles in whatever space you're working in order to create that moment. And you're finding that they aren't really fitting the triangles perfectly. 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna say that's a height issue. You've got a height issue. So things that you can do, tips and tricks for creating extra height for your plants. 1, you can do what I did here, and you can put it on a little round wood plant stand type thing. I don't think it's really a plant stand, but little round wood stand. You could actually get a plant stand to put a plant on to raise it up, like I have done here on my mantle. You could also get a candle holder if you already have one, or you could go get one. I actually got this one, I think, on clearance for like $5, and you can stick the plant up on that. So for example, now I've created some additional height. So if I wanted this plant to be behind some other plants, but it wasn't tall enough, there's a solution there. Another thing that you guys can do is you can actually glue pots together, and you can create what's called a pedestal pot, podium pot. It's one of the two, but that would be more like if you took, for example, this is a cylindrical pot, and then you put a round pot like this on top of it. So if I were to glue these together, and these are like weird textures and stuff, I wouldn't do these two together, you know what I mean? I would want them to be the same color and finish and everything. But now I've created a taller pot situation, but it doesn't always have to be like this where it's like a column, pedestal, podium, whatever they call it, base to it. You can also do it, for example, I have 2 of these little pots. You could just glue these together upside down like this, and put a plant in the top of that. Now you've created extra height. I don't have a little 2-inch plant, but you can imagine if there was a little 2-inch plant in there, what it would look like. So that's another trick that you can do. And you can honestly, you guys, you can find, once again, just go walk around your house and find some things in your house that you can use. So for example, books. You've seen probably lots of places when you go shopping or at other people's houses where they'll have a stack of books on a shelf just for decoration, or they'll have that and then they'll have like a little figurine of, I don't know, an elephant or something on top of it. You can do the same thing. You can take a book or 2 or 3 and stick them under the pot. Just make sure it goes with the look that you're going for. Obviously, if it doesn't, then do one of the other things that I've talked about. But anyway, so that just elevates your plant a little bit, right? But that's something else that you could do. So there's all kinds of ideas out there that you can do. Another thing that I didn't mention yet, at least I don't think I mentioned it, sometimes my brain's all over the place, you can actually put multiple plants in one pot. So let's say you had a big pot, like the pot that the monstera is in back here. You could take multiple smaller plants just in their nursery pots. We could take this gal and maybe a couple other ones that were a little bit taller than this, and we could set them inside that pot and have 3 plants just sitting in one pot, but still get that height variation and that triangle that I've been talking about. You can also do this kind of thing with like trays. If you have a metal tray or maybe a little wood crate, an old wood toolbox, you can put multiple plants in there. So keep that in mind. You don't have to have everybody in their own pot to be creating these moments. Another thing, this is a little tray thing here on legs. In case you guys haven't noticed, I have a thing, I guess, for hairpin legs, because a lot of my stuff is hairpin legs, but you can get something like this, and this actually lives on my island in my kitchen. And normally I have on here here's another triangle example, although I don't have one of the plants, I'll have to go grab it. But I have this on there. I don't have 2 of the plants. I have this on there, and then in these smaller pots, I have 2 other little plants that are shorter. One's kind of a medium height and one's a little bit shorter there. And so these live together on my kitchen island, and I like having him on this because I can very easily, when I need to use the island to cook or film or repot, I can just grab this whole thing and move it elsewhere and then move it back. I'm not having to move 3 different plants separately. So that's kind of nice, but you're still getting like that triangle shape and effect here. But this is also another thing that is good to get some more height when you need more height. Set this back aside. So let's talk about the situations where you have the one plant that you want to make the star, the standout plant. Let's say maybe it's a monstera. Sometimes go big or go home. You can put the monstera up on top of a coffee table if you want. You can put it up on top of an end table if you want, but just make sure it's the standout piece, that there's not a bunch of stuff crowded around it or anything. You want it to be kind of the center of attention. You could also grab like a little podium type thing to put it on, or a pedestal, to really make it stand out as its own little highlighted plant. I have one plant situation in my house where I have it as my standout plant, and it is on my kitchen table. So as you're seeing, this is my Calathea orbifolia, and I just love this plant. I just think it's such a standout plant. I didn't like it grouped with anything else, so it is standalone on my table. However, I did want to create that additional depth. And when I'm talking about depth real quick, you guys, depth this way, you guys, is what we've been talking about so far, by like having one plant in the front and then two plants in the back. But another type of depth can be depth of layers going upwards. So what you're seeing here with the Calathea orbifolia is that I have put down a very natural color and textured placemat, and then on top of that I've put a pebble tray just for decoration and to give that extra height, and then I have the plant sitting in its pot on top of that. So that's giving it more depth from top to bottom versus the depth we've been looking at so far, which is front to back, if that makes sense. But that's what I mean by like one standalone plant by itself. It's a very stunning plant to me, and what's stunning to me may not be stunning to you. So just whatever feels like a stunning plant. Lots of people, monsteras are the ones that they want standalone stunning pieces. You can make them standalone by themselves. Just kind of play around with some of the things like I was just talking about with your depths and things. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is maybe you keep trying to put 3 plants together or 5 plants together or whatever it may be, and you're struggling to get it to work. You don't always have to have everything in that grouping be plants. And sometimes you may have a situation where you have like a mantle that you're trying to put plants on and it's not working because 3 won't really fit well. In this case, found objects are going to be your best friend. I use a lot of found objects. You've already seen some in some of the vignettes we've been looking at so far. Let's go back to what I did over here on my mantle, where I have a plant. This is a trailing plant. It's not trailing yet, but it's going to trail over the edge to break up that hard edge like I was talking about earlier. I have it raised slightly on this little plant stand. I have this glass vase that I just had lying around, and I had some preserved moss. I put it in there as decoration. And then in front of it, I put a shell from one of my travels. So that right there created a little grouping of 3 using only 1 plant. But yeah, I use a lot of shells around my house because I like to go to the beach and I bring shells back a lot from my travels. But some other things you guys can do are like little sculptural objects, or I was mentioning if somebody had a little decorative elephant earlier on, display somewhere, something like that would work. I have on one of my shelves a sand globe with seashells in it that was a gift from a magazine that I worked with way back when. Another interesting thing you can do, you guys, because I don't know if you're like me, but my watering cans are always just sitting out. I don't like have somewhere I store them because I use them so often, and I also fill them with filtered water, and then they need to sit out for the water to get to room temperature. And sometimes it's just like annoying, it's just sitting there. So I actually ordered a more decorative, because right now they're just plastic watering cans. I ordered a more decorative silver metal one so that I can actually incorporate it into some of these vignettes. So now it looks like it's purposely there, even though really I'm using it every day. So another example, a lot of you have plant misters or seen the plant misters like this. If you mist your plants, I don't mist my plants that often, except my air plants. My air plants get misted. But this actually lives in a grouping on my kitchen counter next to my little terrarium with my air plants. Don't judge about the hard water spots, you guys. I need to try to get in there and clean them out, but it's really hard to get them off from the inside of that. But I'm giving you an idea here of how you can incorporate your plant tools into your vignettes. So this little mister, as you saw, just lives there right next to that, and I just grab it and use it when I need to use it, and I set it back, but no one's the wiser because it actually looks like it belongs there. So yeah, there's all kinds of little fun objects that you can find around your house to help tie things in to your groupings. Now, the last thing I want to touch on, this may be a little bit of an advanced styling thing because I think sometimes people struggle with it, but I said there's a rule or guideline of 1s, 3s, 5s. You want odd numbers. I'm going to show you right now an example of combining on one shelf a group of 3s with a group of 1s. So the reason this works, you guys, is because they're separated. The vase on the left, which sometimes I put cuttings in when I have ones that will be taller than anything else on that shelf. That vase is standalone, just over there by itself, being its little bamboo shape because it tied in with the theme I had on this shelf. So it is off to its side, and then the grouping of 3 is off to the right here with my Syngonium Glogo, my Hoya curtisii, and my little wooden contemplative Buddha. That is my grouping of 3 for right there. And so this is a way that you can get away with doing 4 things in a space, but it's tricky. You gotta make sure the heights are right. You've gotta make sure you've got enough space separating those groupings, but it can be done. I'm gonna show you right now one more example of a shelf above the couch where I did that as well, just so you can see different objects, but the same basic thing was done here. And this, as you can see, is a little bit of a reverse situation where the standalone 1 item is actually the smallest plant on the shelf. And then I've got this other grouping over to the right of the mason jar with the Haworthia and another seashell. So because I've created that separation, it works, but also look at the height range across here. That's creating, once again, another triangle. Here's the triangle for you, and then here's the other triangle for you so that you can see. So when you get to that point, you guys, if you're a beginner to plant styling or interior designing, decor designing at all, that's a little bit trickier. It's hard to see the triangles sometimes, I think. So I'm hoping that this has helped you by seeing them drawn over the vignettes on screen today. So the last thing I want to touch on, you guys, and I had mentioned this earlier, was don't let anybody say that you can't put plants on the floor that are small. You can certainly do it. However, I highly recommend, if you're going to do that, that you tie it in to something larger. So for example, I've got the Monstera back here. Let me see if I can move to the side and kind of show you guys this without being totally out of whack off screen. Give me a second to tilt the camera down a little bit, you guys. Okay, I feel kind of like I gotta like hunch over so you can see me here, but let's say we've got this, and let's say we have some smaller plants we want to put on the floor. You could put them around this as kind of like trim, if you will. So for example, we took some of our smaller plants here, and let's say, I actually think that would be really cute to, oh, sorry. Let's say I had another type of peperomia. There's not one readily available for me to grab, but even if I had another frost, I put another frost peperomia here, that would be a cute little small plant situation helping to trim or create a border around the Monstera. That's one way that you can do it. Another thing that you could do, hold on, let me get this camera and tilt it back up again so I'm not having to hunch over. So another thing you could do, or another example of this, is if you had a small-ish end table and you wanted to put some smaller plants bordering that end table. But basically that's how you're cheating the height issue. And that's why a lot of people say, oh, you don't put small plants on the floor, it looks weird because they're too small. Well, once again, do what we've been doing, just tie it into something that's taller, so now it looks more appropriate because you've got something else helping to ground it. And that is basically all of the plant styling tips that I have for you guys today. I hope I've given you enough to kind of make you feel a little bit more confident in your plant styling abilities and being able to find those triangles and create those groupings. But of course, if you're still struggling and you have any questions, just comment down below or DM me on Instagram or Facebook at Aloha Plant Life, and I will see if I can help you. You can always send me a picture and say, hey, did I get my triangles right? And I will let you know if, hey, you know what? That is perfect, that is awesome, good job. Or maybe just try flipping those plants. Sometimes that's all it takes, is you need to move one plant into the other space, right? Just flipping them around. And I will totally be willing to help you guys out as much as I can. I absolutely love plant styling. But thanks again, you guys, for joining me today. And if there are any other video topics that you want to know about, or other aspects of even just plant styling you want to know about, please comment down below. And if you have not yet hit that like and or subscribe button down below, please do so. And I look forward to seeing you again next time. Aloha!